Gilbert O'Sullivan. Welcome to noise11.com. And my great pleasure for the first time getting to talk to you after many, many years of doing this.
Nice to be talking to you, Paul.
Yeah. And here you are, 20 albums in. I mean, you know, like every album is special, but I guess when you get to that magic number 20, it's quite a benchmark number to get to with the new album, Driven. You know, was it sort of treated as something different because you had achieved the 20th studio album?
No, I needed other people to tell me that it was the 20th album. I'm not really into the numbers game. I just like the craft that I love doing, the enthusiasm I have for songwriting, which leads to making a record. Every 3 to 4 years, a new album will come out. That's what it's all about for me. So I was surprised when they first said, you've done 20. Really, I had no idea. It's better to leave the statistics to other people and you just concentrate on what you're doing now.
Fair enough. You've been quite prolific, haven't you, with 3 albums, 2015, I think 2019, and now 2022. Are you constantly writing?
Well, I have a brill building mentality. The brill building is in New York, with the likes of Carole King, Neil Sedaka, Neil Diamond would clock in at 9 o'clock in the morning in this publishing house owned by Don Kirshner, a very famous publisher, who published all their songs. So they'd clock in at 9, sit in a room with a piano to see if they could come up with a song, and then they would clock out at 5 o'clock. So I have that mentality. If I'm in search of a melody, Paul, I need a melody for the next album, or then I will sit there routinely, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month, if necessary, to come up with the melodies I need. And if I find the good melody, I can trunk it, which is what Irving Berlin used to do, because a good melody will survive any length of time. And so therefore, that's the procedure. And then when I meet the producer to make the record, I use individual producers each time, because it's always the same singer, always the same writer. So the nice thing about bringing in a new producer each time, they give you that difference. They give that something a little different to the previous one. And so I'll meet the producer. And normally what happens is they don't get to hear any lyrics, because it'll just be melodies, and they'll like the 12 or 13 melodies we choose. They go away to prepare for a studio, and then I'll spend the next 2 months doing lyrics. Because of the pandemic, with this album, I was able to write the lyrics during the lockdown, because that's what I would do anyway. It didn't bother me in that sense, because I stay at home a lot. I'm a home bird. So for me, unlike so many other people, I wasn't too affected by the lockdown. So I was able to complete all the lyrics. So that's how it works. I'll sit there, I'll have that approach to writing if it's needed. But generally speaking, what I end up writing are enough songs to make the album. I don't write more than is needed. And then I'll stop there. And then really, for once the record is made, it's all about talking to people like yourself and doing promotion globally. And of course, doing concerts.
So do you actually have all of the songs together before you start recording?
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that is the producers heard them, and he's heard the lyrics this time, unlike Ethan Johns, who didn't hear the lyrics the last time. That's when I meet the musicians for the first time, because I let the producer choose the musicians. Because I have really good musicians I work with, but I feel if I'm bringing a new producer on board, I let him pick the musicians. And the great thing is, I met the musicians for the first time in the studio, 2 guitars, bass, drums, and organ. And then they stand around the piano, and I played them the first song, because they haven't heard anything. And that played a couple of times. I'm very rhythmic, so if it's a rock song, it'll still sound pretty percussive. They'll go back to their chairs, we'll rehearse it for a few times, and then the light will come on and we'll take it. So it isn't rocket science, but it's a really nice way to record. And within sort of 5-6 days, we've recorded 14 tracks, and very little overdubbing, because with 2 guitars, as you know, if there's a solo, then he can take off and the other guitars can apply the rhythm that's missing and stuff. So, it's a fascinating, it's a really enjoyable process.
What about the special guests on here? 2 very big names in Mick Hucknall and K.T. Tunstall. What was the decision behind putting someone else to showcase the song with you?
I think, well, as you're probably aware, duets are quite the in thing at the moment. It's if you look at most albums by most people, Ed Sheeran, they're all doing duets. So So what happened was that we finished Take Love, which is really a really good track. Really enjoyed doing it. And myself and the producer thought this would be a good song for a duet. And who would we approach? And I said to Andy, the producer, I said, well, K.T. Tunstall had a record out some years ago called Suddenly I See. Suddenly I See. So, and not a dissimilar tempo. So we thought, okay. So we approached K.T., and who lives in California. She loved the track. We sent the track to her. She put her vocal on in Los Angeles. And and she rocks. It's really good. She came to London because we did a video. I hadn't done a video in 30 years. So it's kind of nice to spend the day with her doing the video. We had a good chat and talked about music and stuff. So that was that with Mick. With Mick Hucknall, it was because Andy Wright is the producer of Simply Red and the producer of Simple Minds. So while we were recording, he would occasionally go to Mick's house, and Mick said to Andy, I know you're recording with Ray Gilbert. If there's something there he think would be nice for me to sing with him, let us know. So we sent him 2 tracks. We sent him Love Casualty and Let Bygones Be Bygones. And he chose Bygones. And a really nice version. It's quite an honor to have him on the record.
So was there ever a duet version of Love Casualty then, or is it just you?
Oh, it's just me, yeah.
But could have been.
Yeah, well, because it's a good, it kind of has a good kind of West Coast feel about it. That's why it opens the album, and I really like that joint. So yeah, but we let Mick choose what maybe he's used to faster stuff. Maybe he just liked the lyrical content of Bygones. Maybe it kind of he related to that. So maybe that's why he chose it. It's a softer vocal. If you hear it, it's not the loud kind of quite raucous Mick that you hear on a lot of Simply Red records. It's quite quiet. Nice. One
of the great duets that I've always loved listening to by you was the one with Peggy Lee all those years ago. Were you and her together in the studio making that?
Yeah. The great thing about that was, Paul, at the time in the 80s, or the mid-80s, I think it was. Was it mid-80s or mid-90s? God, I can't remember.
No, early 1980s, I think.
Well, I'd never done a duet up to that point, and somebody said to me, you should really do a duet on that particular album and stuff. And I didn't want to pick when we decided that Can't Think Straight would be a good one. I didn't want to pick a contemporary singer at the time. I thought, well, who would I really like? And I said, one of my iconic figures is Peggy Lee. I love Peggy Lee. I bought her Latin albums, and Folks Who Live on the Hill is in my top 10 of the greatest recordings. So we thought, well, let's approach Peggy. So we approached her, sent her the tape. She loved the track. And we flew to New York to record her in the Sound Factory in New York. Bit surprised, Paul, when she turned up in a wheelchair. We hadn't quite expected that. And she had what would you call it, oxygen tank with her. Quite frail. I have to say she was quite frail. But, because I think Peggy was in the late 70s, maybe early 80s at this point. But it was magical to see her. And what we loved it, because we filmed it for a video after we put her vocal. It was nice. The makeup lady spent about 2.5 to 3 hours with her. So they turned that kind of fragile person into the kind of Peggy Lee that we kind of know and associate with. And she loved the fact that she was pampered so much. And so it was a great experience. Loved every minute. We filmed it for a video. In fact, in live concerts over the years, we put the screen up where you have her singing her part and then I'm singing my part live. We may do that again in the future. So, yeah, magic moment. I'm glad you like that.
Yeah, that must have been one of the last things she did. I know she did one more album after that, but it must have been a real privilege to be there, at the end of her career.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have that video, that's why I did it, because it was so special to film it and stuff. So to have that is priceless.
When I listen to the Driven album, there's a real Gilbert O'Sullivan sound, isn't it? That's been there right from the very beginning. The minute I put on something like Blue Anchor Bay, it sounds like Gilbert O'Sullivan from those very first notes. Is there an actual sound?
I don't know. Can I ask you, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
It's a good thing. It's it makes me comfortable that I'm listening to somebody that I'm loved over the years, and it's still giving me enjoyment.
Well, a good example is Blue Anchor Bay. Actually, Blue Anchor Bay is one of the few songs that's actually based on a real subject, because And it has that kind of Kinks, kind of sunny afternoon feel about it and stuff. So it's, yeah, I really like that track. But as I say, that was written, that's based on when I was at college. I was at art school for 4 years, early 60s, and lived in Swindon, which is about an hour and a half from London. So we'd occasionally go up on a coach trip to London to visit a gallery, to see an exhibition. But one year, the teachers at our school said, we're going to go have a day trip to the seaside. So we thought, great. And in those days, you know, it was quite a big deal to have a coach trip to the party, whereas now you can fly anywhere in the world and if you wish. But in those days, so we had a day trip to Blue Anchor Bay, which is down in Somerset. And yeah, it was just larked about. So the song is kind of based around that visit. So it's, I'm happy with it.
How many of the songs off Driven are you planning to actually get to perform live?
Well, we do 4. Currently, there's 4. We do Blue Anchor Bay, Let Bygones, Take Love, and Let Me Know. So those are the 4 that we currently are having the live, because we've just finished 8 shows a few days ago. And the reaction, you know, we do a 2-hour concert, Paul, so it's 4 songs are just a small sample of the album. I don't want to push it too much. I don't want to make that mistake that people like Elton have made in the past, where you come out and you play your whole album. So it's, yeah.
Yes, that's sort of the curse of being the older artist, isn't it? That you only get to cherry pick whatever you're going to perform off the new album, as opposed to when you've only got 1 or 2 albums, you get to play it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, going back to all of those hits, I mean, you know, like we first heard of you with Alone Again Naturally in Australia, but you'd already established and had, I think, about 4 or 5 hits prior to that in the UK.
I thought actually, when Nothing Rhyme came out, which was a huge success around Europe, I thought that was actually a hit in Australia, because I seem to remember there were offers for me to go to Australia when that took off. Normally happens if you're a new artist and you have success, you get offers to go everywhere. I was very lucky in not having to do that, not needing to do that, allowing me to spend more time at home writing songs. Because my manager, Gordon Mills, with Tom Jones and Engelbert Humphrey, he didn't need to send me out maybe to earn extra income for him on the back of the success I was having. So therefore, he laid off sending me to faraway places. Yeah, to Europe, go across to France, to Germany, to Spain, but you're back within a couple of days. So it's, you know, so that in that sense, but Australia, I thought Nothing Rhymed had meant something there. But,
it might have got airplay sort of after the event of Alone Again. It might have been one of those songs that we backed back on. But Alone Again was actually the first chart hit in this country.
Yeah, interesting enough, when we did the tour of America recently and we play Nothing Rhyme, people really like it. When I meet people afterwards, they've only heard it for the first time. And they find it interesting that there's a verse in there about starving children. And so, and what's interesting about the song when I wrote it was that, you may be aware of this, but in up to the point of the Biafra, when all the starving millions and stuff, it had never been seen on television before. This was the first time anybody ever saw starving children on the television. And it just, you know, it resonated all around the world. And so I kind of picked up on that in part of the song. And so it's interesting when I hear people now say that they really like that song. And it's interesting that you wrote about something historically horrible.
What about the subject of Alone Again Naturally? Must, you know, what sort of emotion goes through you when you perform that?
Well, there's 2 things. I never rehearsed the song. I rehearse it melodically, but I never rehearse it vocally, because it's too strong a lyric for me to be singing 9 times out of 10 and rehearsing. But in performance-wise, it's the reaction is, you know, people tend to sing the hook line at the end of it. You can hear a whole audience sing out. They almost want to join in on the verses, but I think they ease off of that. But you hear them singing at the end of each verse. It really is. It captures something very special. There's no question about it.
And it was nominated for a couple of Grammy Awards, you know, stolen by Roberta Flack. Have you ever met Roberta and had the conversation?
Well, here's the interesting thing about that is, for you, out of interest, myself and what's his name? American Pie. What's his?
Don McLean.
Don McLean. We were the 2 nominees who were playing live on the night. And Roberta wasn't there. Harry Nilsson was there, but he wasn't performing. So the only 2 performers were myself and and I keep forgetting his name.
On McLean.
Don. And everybody would be coming up to us before the show saying, it's going to be you. You know, the people all over it. And they must have been doing it to Don as well, because they said, if you're performing, you're bound to be winning. So I was nominated for 3. Don was nominated for 4. Neither of us won anything. But I felt more sorry for him than I did for me. After all, he's American. American Pie is a classic American song. Why did? And the reason given apparently was that it's your first success, so we don't give it to you on your first success. If you have success the next year, we might give you one. So interesting. Well, I really felt for Don.
Yeah. There were so many hits that you were having then. Claire came along. That was another #1 song. You know, was going on with your lifestyle, you know, when you were basically the biggest pop star in the world at the time.
I have feet firmly on the ground. I'm not a red carpet person, so I didn't mix in show business circles and stuff. I dated a few girls, but I kept the relationship very thin. I didn't want to get involved in anything that would interfere. I'm very, you know, the attitude I have towards writing songs is 101%. I stick with it. I let nothing interfere with that. So I was happy to go across to Holland to do a TV, but I'd be back within a couple of days into my house with the piano, and I could then spend the day trying to write songs. That was everything to me. Nothing could interfere with that. So that's, as for partying, so I didn't do that. I wasn't like that. I don't drive. I like being at home. And I'm basically shy. So I don't want to go out. I'm not interested. The success is great to have it. I never expected the success we achieved in America, let alone Australia. It's nice that it happened. But for me, growing up in England, all I really saw in terms of success was to be a hit in England. And so when it happened around the world, I mean, of course, it was really nice, but my feet were firmly on the ground, and I didn't let any of that affect me in the sense that I partied until all hours and took advantage of whatever was going on. And that's how I was, and that's pretty much how I still am.
Yeah. Who Was It was one of your songs, but in Australia, that was a hit for Hurricane.
Well, Andy Williams actually did a really nice version of that. He was a big fan of mine. And he did a really good version of Who Was It stuff. We sometimes do that on stage too. So it's Norman Smith, Hurricane. He was the Beatles engineer on the first 4 or 5 albums and stuff.
Yeah.
So I met him a few times. A nice person. Sadly, no longer here.
Right. So he sort of stepped away from being a producer. What, did he have aspirations of being a pop star at that point?
I think he enjoyed the moment. I mean, I didn't realize he was involved so much with the Beatles, because when we read books about that period now, he's there at the forefront. But mostly I did a couple of TV shows with him and a couple of radio broadcasts with him and stuff. And we just talked about, he was really enjoying the moment of having a couple of hits with. He had that first big song. I forget what it was called.
Babe, what would you say?
Babe, what would you say? So it's a nice person.
Mm. And then Ooh Wackadoo Wackaday. I mean, there was just so many Gilbert O'Sullivan hits. This is just before I got into radio. And, you know, I just remember that at the time, you know, living in Sydney as a kid, you were always on the radio. Ooh Wackadoo Wackaday. I don't think it was an album track, was it? It was
in those days, we didn't put singles on albums. Singles were separate. In my case, quite a few records, no matter how I tried, Ooh Wackadoo, Belonging, were not put on albums and stuff. That came later. Now almost every track is a single. So.
Tell me about you know, before you stepped out to become a solo artist. You're working with Rick Davis of Supertramp, I believe. The story that I heard was that he was the man who taught you how to play the piano. Is that true?
He taught me to play blues piano. Rick is one of those unique people who's a gifted musician, brilliant keyboard player, an absolutely brilliant drummer. Better than I was the drummer in the band. And his record collection was all the kind of people you would never expect. My record collection was the pop market of the day. For example, I would take him up and say, listen to the Beatles version of Roll Over Beethoven. And he'd say, well, put on the original by Chuck Berry, please. So he's one of those people, very gifted musician. So I was in the band with him, and we were a really good band. And Rick taught me how to play blues piano, because we used to go to his grandma's house and we would play there, practice and stuff. So we were good friends, but musically very strong. And our band could have turned professional. We were called Rick's Blues. We were really that good. But the guitar player and the bass player were on apprenticeships, so they didn't want to risk giving up. So that meant that Rick and I were determined to have a career in music, but Rick needed to be in a band. There's no question of him being on his own. So he joined a band called the Lonely Ones, which became a band called the Joint, which then ended up being Supertramp. And then I ended up being me. So.
Yes. You also did, I guess, a lot of musicians a service when there was that court case, well, legal action anyway, with Biz Markie, who had sampled you on one of those songs. That actually changed the way we now account for songs as samples, isn't it?
Yeah, it sets a precedent. A court case sets a precedent. So after that court case, setting a precedent means anybody else who wants to sample has to go through the correct channels. Before, with Biz Markie, they just didn't care. He sampled and who cared what was going on. And so with Biz Markie, because it was Alone Again that he sampled, when he approached us, when his people approached us, we said, well, let us hear it. If it's good and it's serious and it's not comical, we might let it happen. But he's a comic rapper. And so I said, no, he couldn't use it. But he still went ahead and did it. So what do you do? So do you say, okay, I'll just leave it? No, I'm going to stop this. But I had to go to New York. I'm the one that had to go into court. I'm the one that had to go on the stand first. I'm the one that had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with lawyers to fight the case. I knew I would win it, but I had to go through all that, and who needs it? And the nice thing was that he wasn't even there, Biz Markie. He didn't even turn up for the court case. So after 3 days, after I had finished telling what was going on and how wrong it was, the judge, who was a cool guy, and because Biz Markie's record label was distributed by Warner Brothers, and this would have been coming up to the winter period when you're getting set for the releases for around Christmas time, a big time in the record business. So the judge said, if you don't remove this track within the next month or the next week, I'll have every Warner Brothers track taken off. Well, the S hit the fan massively. And by the time we walked back to my lawyer's offices, the telephones went crazy and it was all over. But who needs that? Well, I have to tell you, you can do without having to go to court. But the result is a positive thing for the future and for people who have been sampled.
Wasn't there also a court case with Gordon Mills at one point as well?
Yeah, well, that was the breakup in my relationship with Gordon. Kind of cut a long story short, Gordon was a great manager for me. He produced all my records, Get Down, Claire, he produced all those. Claire was written about his daughter, and he plays the harmonica, and Claire laughs at the end. So I did that as a thank you to them. But by 76, things were easing off, not generating as much interest. And Gordon said, you're a wealthy boy, don't worry about it, everything will be fine. And I wasn't happy with that. And I said to Gordon, Rod Stewart, produced by Tom Dowd in America, why don't you let me be produced by one of these people? You're still my manager and you can benefit from it. We can all benefit from it. But he said, no, if you don't let me, if I'm not going to produce your records, nobody is. And so I had to make that decision. What do I do? Just leave things the way they are? Or, and I'm determined, I'm still desperate to be successful. That's still in me. So I broke up with him. And when we parted company, when he took me on in 1970, I had been promised my own company within a company. For example, just in case, if you earn £100 as a songwriter, 50 goes to you as the writer and 50 goes to the publisher. That's how it works. So what they were starting to do in 1970 was give writers a little bit of the publishing, of the publisher share. So in other words, the writer gets his 50%, and the 50% that goes to the publisher, 25% would go to the writer, who could have his own little company. It was a brand new thing, and it was becoming very popular. So when Gordon Mills took me on in 1970, and I said, would I get that with him? And he said, well, no, not now, but if you are successful, I'll give it to you. So throughout the period from 71, 72, I would occasionally say, any news on this little publishing thing for me? Yeah, don't worry, it's going to happen. 73, 74, any news on this publishing thing going to happen? Don't worry, it's all going to happen. And I wasn't concerned. I was getting on with it. What we would do. 75, any news on the publishing? Don't worry, I'll see that it's done. I break up with him and we shook hands, and I said as I was leaving his office at his home, I said, will I still get my interest in the publishing? And he said, yeah, you go into the office. This was a weekend. Go into the office on Monday, and Bill Smith, the chairman, we'll sort it out for you. So with my wife, we went in on the Monday. went up to his office. He knew what happened, and he just said, F off, basically. You're not getting anything. So that's what drove me to again, that attitude I have. You know, I've been wronged out of something which is, it's not about money. It's about something that was just promised to me, a small interest. And so I looked up lawyers. I got somebody to help me choose a lawyer outside of the MEM that I'd been involved with. And they took me on. And the good thing is that they said, you know, you can't just go into court on just because you were promised this small little thing. There has to be more. There has to be more to it than that. And of course there was conflict of interest came up, because Gordon was my manager and he was the head of the record company. So how, in other words, are you going to negotiate a deal for him if you're the record company and you're the manager? And so those kind of things were brought into it, not by me, but by the lawyers. And it was a success. But again, all they had to do, all Gordon had to do was to say, okay, give it to him. That's all he wants. Let him have it. And they would have continued for the rest of time to own all my masters, to own all the publishing full time. But instead they refused, and I ended up getting back all the master recordings and getting back the majority of my publishing. Yeah. No complaints in the end.
And ended up with another hit, What's in a Kiss, in the early 80s. So. That was nice. And that was under the guidance of Gus Dudgeon, who produced that off-center. Well, we look forward to hopefully hearing very, very soon that there will be a Gilbert O'Sullivan tour of Australia in 2023. We'll just sit here and cross our fingers for that. It was only a few years ago we had you down here before the pandemic, so it'd be nice to have you.
And we played Melbourne, Paul. We were in Melbourne. We did a date in Melbourne. We did like Melbourne. It had that kind of London feel about it. So we did Melbourne. We did Sydney. We did quite a few venues down there. But we'll be back. And hopefully you'll get a chance to come along and see us.
Fantastic. In the meantime, thank you for joining us here at Noise 11.
All right, pleasure, Paul. All right, take care.